welcome to my channel. My name is Kate, and today I'm going to be doing my first book haul video. I haven't done one of these before, but I really enjoy watching other people's book hauls because it adds to my TBR and it's fun to see what books people have gotten, so hopefully this will be fun for you guys as well. I'm going to be covering what I got in October and November. I have a book buying problem, so this might be a little bit long. I'm thinking I'll just have the one part, but if it ends up being too long, I'll split it into two. I don't like doing super long videos if I can help it. But it should be fun, so hopefully you enjoy and find something fun for your TBR too. The first one that I'm going to talk about for October is an Illumicrate book. The theme for October was Revenge is Sweeter, and so the book that I got for that was Iron Widow by, I think it's Sharon J. Zhao. I know they have a YouTube channel, so I will post a link to their channel. I haven't watched any of their videos, but I've heard they do some really interesting stuff. I think they've talked about some of the issues that they had with Mulan. This particular one, the main thing that I know about it, the tagline for it is basically Handmaid's Tale with Max in kind of a futuristic but still but super misogynistic China. And I love the cover for this. It's just absolutely gorgeous. They did some really neat sprayed edges on here, and then one of the things that I do really like about Illumicrate, they are expensive, especially if you live in the US because you have to pay for shipping, but they do have some really neat designs that they do, and one of the things I really like is some of the inside of the cover is really gorgeous. Let's see if I can, yeah, there we go. And then sometimes they do cool little foil on the cover itself. So I am excited for this. It's definitely revenge centric, as you might expect, so I haven't gotten to it. I just haven't been in the mood for a revenge story, really. But I've heard very good things about it, so I'm definitely excited to get to it soon. The next two books that I'm going to talk about, I got from a independent bookstore in Massachusetts. Has a SFF novella snack box that is super awesome. The name of the bookstore is Copper Dog Books, and I will leave a link to them in the description so that you can check that out if you're interested. I have really been enjoying getting this book box. I am honestly really awkward with unboxings, which is why I haven't done one for them, but I definitely really want to promote them because I think it's an awesome product, especially if you're an SFF fan and especially if you like novellas. I think that sometimes people don't give novellas a lot of credit, but they can tell really interesting, really tight stories in a short amount of time. And when you find an author who's good at them, it's deeply satisfying. And I have actually gotten a couple books, quite a few books, out of this book box that I'm really excited to get to. Some of them are favorite authors, and some of them are authors I've been wanting to get to. So before I keep going on about it, I definitely highly recommend this snack box. The theme for October was folklore and fairy tales. So the first one that I'll talk about is Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw, I think. I'm not 100% sure the best way to pronounce that author's last name. This is actually a horror novella, and it's based around a group of friends who end up spending the night in a haunted Japanese mansion. And I imagine things go about as well as you'd expect, especially given how creepy the cover is for this. I have been really interested in Cassandra Khaw's stuff for a long time. The way the descriptions have been for all of the author's books have led me to believe it's kind of dark, but also has SFF vibes. So I'm definitely excited to get to this. The other one that I got in that box was A Spindle Splintered by Alex E. Harrow. And I don't know much about this other than that it's a new take on Sleeping Beauty, I believe. I have not read anything by Alex E. Harrow, but I've been very tempted, particularly the Once and Future Witches. Thousand Doors of January sounded like not my thing, but I've heard very good things. I've heard she does great kind of twists on fairy tales, so I'm definitely excited to get to this. Sleeping Beauty has never been my favorite fairy tale, but I think she might do some interesting stuff with it. So I'm excited to get to that one as well. The other physical books that I'm going to mention for this book haul are books that I got when I was in Washington, D.C. in October for my cousin's wedding, which was a great trip. My mom and I got to kind of tour around, had a lot of fun, and of course, the souvenirs that I brought home were just books, because I can't resist books, especially in museum gift shops. So I ended up with a number of them. So one of the places that we ended up going was Mount Vernon, which I had never been to. It was super interesting to see. First book that I picked up from there is Revolutionary Mothers. This one is by Carol Birkin, and this one really caught my interest because it talks about how the American Revolution affected the home front a lot, as you might expect if you know anything about the American Revolution. But this kind of talks about the role that women played during that, and how pivotal they were to the revolution. And I've always been interested in this type of thing. I have another book that's specifically women warriors, but it's really interesting to me to see how women kind of interacted with war times and the things that they did to support, whether it was active or whether it was stuff at home. So it's very interesting to me, so I'm really looking forward to reading this. Unfortunately, I think I'm going to wait until I have a better, more recent grasp on the American Revolution. I know what I learned in school, but it's been a long time. I didn't get interested in U.S. history as much until relatively recently. So I am very curious to check this out once I have, refreshed myself on the details of the American Revolution. The other one I got is The Cause, American Revolution and Its Discontents, 1773 to 1783 by Joseph J. Ellis. And this one, I'm hoping this one will kind of give me a good sense of the Revolutionary War and kind of how it built. The main concept here is that the author is basically going in and talking about kind of the philosophies and the politics around the American Revolution and all of the various details with that. It sounds like it'll be a more nuanced take on the American Revolution, and I'm very excited to check this out. And one of the other places that I had been that I was actually, it feels weird to say excited to see a cemetery, but I was very interested in, and Arlington. And I've always been fascinated by military history, and so I had always wanted to actually see it. And when I did go and kind of wander around, I ended up in the gift shop, found a couple books that were really interesting. The first of which is On Hallowed Ground, which is actually the story of Arlington Cemetery. It is by Robert M. Poole. Don't know anything. I know Arlington basically became a national cemetery after the Civil War, but I know basically that's all I know about Arlington. So I was very excited to get this, and I'm hoping it'll give me some more information about that. The other one that I got from Arlington is In Flanders Fields, which is an anthology on the 100-year anniversary of the end of the First World War, which again is a really interesting time period to me. A really depressing one, but it's interesting to know how people responded to carnage on that level and, frankly, incompetence. So I'm very curious to see what people have to say, on the 100th anniversary of it. Then the other museum that I went to that I was very impressed by was the I may not be remembering the name quite correctly, but the African American History Museum. That's part of the Smithsonian. You don't get a lot of those details sometimes in schools, so it was very interesting. They had a whole exhibit on the Reconstruction after the American Civil War, which, again, a little depressing, but also really valuable. And I ended up getting a couple books from there. One, sticking with the World War I theme, was Harlem's Rattlers and the Great War. This is by Jeffrey T. Sammons and John H. Morrow Jr. And this is basically about a specific regiment that of African American soldiers who fought during World War I, which was very difficult because everything was segregated, and a lot of times they were kind of pushed to the side. A really interesting book that talks about some of this, some of the segregation, some of the different ways they were treated, is in The Last of the Doughboys. I don't remember the name of the author, so I'll put the cover of the book on the screen, but I highly recommend that one if you're at all interested in American involvement in World War I. It's composed of a series of interviews that the author did with World War I vets, because a lot of them were passing away, but we didn't have stories from them, and it is just fascinating to see those, or to get to experience those interviews. Then the last book that I picked up is in fact from that Reconstruction exhibit, which is Make Good the Promises. This has a lot of photos, and I'm hoping to get kind of more expanded information on what was in the exhibits. So I'm excited to check this out. I think it should be really interesting. I know a fair amount about the Civil War, not expert or anything, but it's always been interesting to me. But I don't know as much about the Reconstruction, because most of my interest in the American Civil War has been based on Lincoln, who I think is a fascinating figure. And that's why I haven't, Reconstruction is after his death, spoiler alert, so I just have never gotten around to learning much about it. So now I'm going to talk about a couple ebooks that I also picked up during the month of October. The first one is The Utterly Uninteresting and Unadventurous Tales of Fred the Vampire Accountant by Drew Hayes. I picked this up because Pete, and I'll link his channel below, has been talking about this a lot. It sounds like humorous fantasy about an accountant who ends up getting turned into a vampire and all the stuff that goes, kind of his adventures, and it just sounded super fun. I think it came up when we were talking about Orconomics, which I really loved, so I have high hopes for this one as well. Might be like a comfort read in between some of the longer books that I have. The next one is Ringlander by Michael S. Jackson. I picked this up because it was a daily deal, and I believe it was posted in Andrew's Wizardly Reads Discord. And this one was a semi-finalist for the self-published fantasy blog off. That's always a mouthful for me to remember the 7th round or version of that. And it's described as a fast-paced epic fantasy adventure full of games, grit, and magic, which sounded really fun. And I think it has a female lead character, which is always a selling point for me. So I picked that one up. Hopefully I'll get to that at some point soon, but with my TBR, who knows. Then the last ebook that I picked up in October was Swords and Deviltry by Fritz Leiber. I picked this one up. This is Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, which is a sword and sorcery classic fantasy series. I've never read it, but I am interested in sword and sorcery, so I'm hoping to get to that one as well soon. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the November books, and again, I'll start off with the Illumicrate and the Copper Dog books, so I can kind of talk about all the awesome stuff from them. Book box first. Okay, so this time I'm going to change it up and talk about Copper Dog first. The theme for that month was creation and civilization, and I was stoked about this box because the first novella that I saw in there was one that I have been looking forward to. I loved a previous book by this author. I've had mixed things, I'll admit. One novella that I can't think of the name of by this author, Adrian Tchaikovsky, didn't work for me at all. It was a DNF, even though it was a novella. I won't get into it, it just wasn't for me. But I recently, earlier this year, read Guns of the Dawn, which was just one of my favorite books of the year. So good. Very historical, pretty light on the fantasy, but just incredible treatment of war and high society. It was just beautifully done. So, the book that was in the box for November was Elder Race, and I love the cover for this. I'm going to probably be getting to that as soon as I get done filming, because I am stoked about reading this and I just haven't had time for it until now. But the basic concept is that one of the main characters is the younger daughter of a queen who's kind of responsible for making sure that people are taken care of. And there's a demon who's terrorizing everyone. And she ends up having to go get help from this sorcerer in a tower. But unbeknownst to her, the sorcerer is forbidden from interfering. The sorcerer is forbidden from helping anybody and has kind of his own secrets. And I am so stoked to get to this. I really enjoy Tchaikovsky's writing for the most part, so I am so curious to see what he does with this. So, that was the first Copper Dog book. The other one that I have is Comfort Me with Apples by Catherine M. Valente. This has more of a horror vibe, where, as far as I understand it, the main character in this story has basically been created for her husband and is dedicated to her husband and how perfect their lives are. And obviously, then she starts to wonder about some things, and it basically goes from there. I loved a collection, an anthology that Valente had written before, which was called The Melancholy... I'm gonna put up the cover because it's The Melancholy Something of Mecha Girl. And it's an anthology of Japanese-inspired stories. She is not Japanese, but she lived in Japan for a while, and kind of this is her being influenced by that, and it's beautifully done. It's a collection of poems and short stories, and I just really loved her style of writing, so I am definitely excited to get to this. I stay away from horror usually in December because I want like fluffy stuff for Christmas and the holiday season in general, but I am definitely very curious about Comfort Me with Apples. And the Illumicrate book for November, the theme was Death and Fortune, and the book that we got for that was Little Thieves by Margaret Owen. And this is one of the prettier books that I have gotten. It has the cool sprayed edges, and then it has the naked hardback. It's just so cool, and it actually made me more interested in reading the book, to be honest. But it's got all this sweet art on it, and then on the back as well. But the basic story is that it's a twist on the Goose Girl tale. For anybody who doesn't know, the basics of the Goose Girl story is that there's a kind of wicked maid who ends up impersonating a princess, and the princess has to live as a maid because the maid basically takes her identity, and she has to try and get her life back. The Goose Girl is told from the perspective of the thieving maid, and she basically becomes kind of like a heist story where she takes the place of the princess and uses the highborn connections to be able to steal from the nobility so that she can set herself up later for a better life. Not always a huge fan of heist stories because they can be very high tension, and my anxious self sometimes has a hard time handling that. But the more I hear about this, the more I want to read it. And again, that naked hardback just makes it look so fun. So I'm definitely looking forward to checking this one out. Then there will be a slight theme for these books, which is that if I walk into a Barnes & Noble, I can't resist the buy one, get one half off thing that they often have going. So there's a number from November that I got myself in trouble with, and these next couple are from that. The first one was their pick for YA, and that is the Grimrose Girls by Laura Pohl. The main idea here is that there are four girls who are at the center of the story who are going to this elite academy. They're all kind of related to fairy tales in some sense. One of the girls dies mysteriously. It's ruled as a suicide, but they're not really sure. And then there's kind of all these dark secrets that they get entangled with. It sounded very interesting. I am a sucker for takes on fairy tales, so I was definitely curious about this. YA is very hit or miss for me. Sometimes I love it, sometimes I really don't. So it'll be interesting to see where this one lands for me. I also really like the cover for this, because I already showed the back, but it has a neat little roses pattern on the, I already showed the front, but neat little roses pattern on the back. So I'm definitely curious about this one. One of the other ones I got from the buy one get one at Barnes & Noble was Agent Sonia by Ben McIntyre. I have a number of McIntyre's books on ebook already. He tends to write a lot of nonfiction regarding World War II. He's written about the British Special Forces, why can I not remember, SAS, I believe. During World War II, I've always heard really good things about his nonfiction in general. Kind of that it's very fast-paced, exciting, like it doesn't feel like what most people think of with history books where it's kind of dry. I actually love both kinds of history books, so I'm not picky, but this one sounded really interesting because it follows a woman who was a really successful Soviet spy during the 40s, and it just sounded, it's basically about how she evaded a lot of the groups that were trying to track her down, like FBI, MI5, MI6, the Nazis, Japanese secret police. So she was doing all kinds of stuff, but it sounds really interesting, so I'm definitely excited to get to this soon when I get back to reading history, hopefully. Then I have an anthology that I've actually already read and loved, so this is a plug for this book if you haven't gotten to it yet and you're interested in SFF anthologies, and that is The Mythic Dream. This is edited by Dominic Parisian and Nava Wolf. It is one of the best anthologies that I think I've read in terms of how many of the stories I really enjoyed. Sometimes anthologies feel like a mixed bag where I like some of the stories and I'm really disappointed by others. I didn't love every story in Mythic Dream, but on balance, it was just so good. And on the note of that anthology, I'll go ahead and mention one of the other books that I bought this month, which is The Starlit Wood. This one is edited by the very same people, slightly different group of authors in this one, but this one is fairy tales. I picked up The Mythic Dream after hearing Evie, whose channel I will link below, and Angela, whose channel I will also link below, talk about it, and made me want to pick it up. And then Evie, I think, had mentioned that once you finish Mythic Dream, you're going to want Starlit Wood, because it's apparently also very good. So I'm stoked for this. I really want to get to this one soon because I loved Mythic Dream so much, and I'm already a sucker for fairy tales even more than I am for myths, so definitely want to get to this one soon. So I have two more that I got from Barnes & Noble from the buy one get one half off, and this one is just like, Caitlin, why did you do that? Come on, man. and that is Bloody Rose by Nicholas Eames, which is not, I am sure, a bad book. I have been super excited about this series because I've heard so many good things about it. I have not read Kings of the Wild yet. I am reading Kings of the Wild this month, but I love this cover, and it was half off, so I just went for it. I gambled. I hope that it is one that works out for me, because God, I just love it. So cover buy, and also deep hope that that series works for me, because now I own the 2 books that are out in it. So if it doesn't work for me, that's going to be real sad. Another one that's kind of a gamble because I've heard great things, but I'm not a huge contemporary romance fan, and that is The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. I've heard so many people talk about how much they love this that I couldn't resist it when I saw it at Barnes & Noble. I'm definitely curious about it. Like I said, I enjoy romance, but I tend to only read historical romance. I don't even really read fantasy romance for the most part. So I am hopeful that it works for me. We'll just see. I've heard so many good things now that I had to take the risk. A couple books that I picked up when I was at my one of the local bookstores near me, Tattered Cover, which if you're ever in Denver, highly recommend checking out Tattered Cover. They're a great independent bookstore. They always have good selections. They have great staff picks, so definitely love going to see them. But I ended up picking up The Last Watch by J.S. Dews. Recruits, exiles, and court-martial dregs of the military. But they're stationed at this place at the edge of the universe, and then things go wrong, and basically the universe is depending on them to save everyone. It sounded it sounded fun. I have heard mixed reviews for this, but the premise just hooked me. I'm a sucker for space operas in general. I'm a sucker for kind of ragtag groups that get together and have to save everybody, so it hit a lot of the buttons that I wanted. I don't love the way it's described, which is The Expanse meets Game of Thrones. It's like, stop it. Just please stop. No more Game of Thrones comparisons. Enough is enough. But it does sound like a really fun story. Then the other one is actually one that I had on my shelf a long time ago, but I had it in mass market paperback, and I am super picky about that. I do not like mass markets. The text is tiny, and they're just not a good, hand feel for me. I know that's a weird thing, but I like the big floppy paperbacks. They are what I want for my reading. I don't even really like hardcovers very much. But this one is Perdido Street Station by China Mieville. I don't know if I pronounced that right. I am actually a pretty big fan of this author. I read Kraken, which is honestly one of the weirdest SFF stories that I've read. Urban fantasy involving a squid cult, and there's this giant kraken who's on display at this museum, and then it disappears, and there's all this kind of intrigue surrounding it, and it's like magic in present day, because you have a bunch of wizards, and you have I don't remember if there's time travel in this, but there's assassins who kind of made me think of Mr. Krupp and Venmar from Neverwhere, if you've read that. It is definitely weirder than Neverwhere, but I really enjoyed it. So, moving to Perdido Street Station, I believe this is supposed to be a gothic fantasy, and that's basically all I know about it. The thing to know about China Mieville is that he's weird. His books are weird. I mean, there's really no getting around it. But if you're at all a fan of how authors can use language in really interesting ways, I would highly recommend him. If you are a person who gets really frustrated if you have to reach for a dictionary when you read an author, do not read China Mieville. I normally don't have problems with that when I read. I keep a dictionary handy for his books. But he does really interesting things. So if you're into weird, interesting SFF, I would give him a shot. Well, only a couple more to go. The next one that I will mention, physical one, is Terciel and Eleanor. It's hard to get that to read correctly. Kind of, there we go. This is the newest in the, I think it's called the Old Kingdom series. I read the original trilogy for this, the Abhorsen trilogy, earlier this year and really enjoyed it. It's a YA series with necromancers and kind of there's this blending of a somewhat modern country that's bordered by this country that is specifically kind of more high fantasy because like technology doesn't work there and the dead walk. You have necromancers who are on the side of good, who are basically responsible for keeping the peace, and you have necromancers who are not on the side of good, who basically are trying to use the dead to take power. So you kind of have that element. This series follows the parents of one of the characters in the original trilogy, and I have been very curious about it. I also deeply love this cover. You won't necessarily love it unless you've read the original series, and then there's some characters here that are very familiar and exciting. So I am definitely super stoked to get to this soon. The last two physical books that I'm going to talk about are my first books that I have gotten from Book of the Month, which was exciting. I have kept hearing about Book of the Month, and I've been keeping an eye on it. But until recently, they didn't have a monthly pick I was super interested in. So this month, I am blaming Michael Knipp for this pick. And that is How to Marry Keanu Reeves in 90 Days by K.M. Jackson. And again, I don't usually read contemporary fantasy, or I mean contemporary romance. The main concept here is that the main character is kind of obsessed with Keanu Reeves, finds out he's getting married, and basically embarks on a road trip to stop it. And it's supposed to be kind of like this rom-com atmosphere. If you want a much better description of this, which is what sold me on actually trying it, check out Michael's review. I'll put it in the cards and in the description as well. But I finally got this because they did a Thanksgiving sale where you could get your first book for like $5, and then I got the add-on for $10, so it was too good of a deal to pass up for that one. The other one that I ended up picking as my add-on, which I am stoked about, is The Inheritance of Orchidea Divina. And I love this cover. It looks very pink on camera, but it's like almost this scarlet red. And I am very excited about this. I haven't read a ton of magical realism besides Bless Me Ultima, which I loved. But it sounds like something very intriguing to me. The concept is basically that there's this family that's has basically this kind of witchy matriarch, and she summons everybody together when she's on her deathbed to basically give them their inheritance, and then the past kind of comes back to bite them. As far as I understand it, is Burn Red Skies by Kirsten Espinosa Rosero. I think this one is a finalist for the self-published fantasy blog off this year, if I remember correctly. The main thing I know about it is it features a girl main character. The world has kind of been destroyed thanks to this cataclysm, and this dragon has been awoken, and she needs to slay the dragon for reasons I don't completely understand, and navigate this army that is trying to deal with it at the same time. So it's my basic understanding of it. I could be wrong, but it sounded, I mean, dragons, female main character, pretty much sold. So I'm curious to check that one out. Then I have Far From the Light of Heaven by Tade Thompson, which sounds like kind of a blend of murder mystery in space. Basically, the concept is there's this colony ship that's traveling through space and trying to go to this far-off planet. The first mate of the ship wakes up mid-trip and finds out that some of the people who were some of the colonists who are being transported have died mid-flight, and kind of has to figure out what's happening. I loved Tade Thompson's Molly Southbourne horror novellas, so I am very curious to see what he does with a murder mystery in space. I'm a sucker for murder mysteries in general, so I'm very curious to check that one out. And I think that just came out like really recently, and Orbit just did a sale where some of their newer stuff was super cheap on ebook. So I picked it up then. So the last one I'm going to be talking about is Sword Heart by T. Kingfisher. This I picked up on the recommendation of the channel Bright and Bookish, and the way she talked about this book immediately sold me on it. It just sounded so fun, and it kind of gave me vibes of Knives Out, which is a great movie if you haven't seen that, which is kind of a murder mystery involving a really messed up family, kind of like And Then There Were None. It's super strong Agatha Christie vibes. But I picked up Sword Heart because the basic concept is that there's this middle-aged woman who's been living with her in-laws and taking care of her great-uncle, Silas. He ends up dying and gives her basically everything. She inherits everything from him, and his family's super pissed off about that, so they basically imprison her in the tower, and she's trying to figure out how to escape when she happens to discover this enchanted sword. And there's actually a man who's been enchanted in the sword, so whoever carries the sword, he is bound to protect them, and he basically tries to help her out, and then things escalate from there. I have just started reading this. I'm about 20% in, and I definitely think it's one of those stories that it fits a certain niche, so it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but I'm enjoying it immensely. So it's definitely one that I am having a good time with. So that is my ridiculous number of books that I have bought myself in October and November. Let me know if any of these are ones that you have read previously and if you would recommend them, and I will see you guys in the next one.